Sarah wakes with a knot in her stomach, the pregnancy test still unopened on her bedside table. She knows she can't put it off much longer, not just because of her own need for answers, but because the uncertainty is eating her alive. She dresses quietly, pulling on a simple black outfit, her hands trembling as she brushes her hair. Downstairs, the house is hushed. Her grandmother, Charity Dingle, is already up, bustling about with a forced cheerfulness that doesn't quite reach her eyes. Everyone's focused on the funeral, on giving Leela the send-off she deserves, but Sarah's mind is elsewhere. Meanwhile, the village is abuzz with preparations. Leela's friends and family have pulled out all the stops, honoring her love for glamour with elegant outfits and carefully styled hair. There's a bittersweet edge to it. Leila, with her sharp wit and bold personality, would have loved the fuss, even if she'd have rolled her eyes at the tears. At Jacob's request, Liam Kavanagh steps up to deliver a eulogy Leila wrote herself before her death. It's a poignant touch, a final gift from a mother to her son, though no one anticipates just how personal it will be. As Liam reads her words aloud in the church, his voice steady but thick with emotion, the congregation listens in reverent silence. To my Jacob, the eulogy begins, "You are my light, my reason, my everything. Don't let this world dim what's inside you." Jacob, seated in the front pew, feels the air leave his lungs. The words are unmistakably for him, a love letter from beyond the grave, and they hit like a tidal wave. His hands clench into fists, his jaw tight as he fights back tears. Around him, the villagers murmur softly, some reaching out to pat his shoulder, but he barely registers it. He's drowning in the realization that his mom knew him better than he knew himself, and now she's gone. It's too much, too raw, and he can't process it, not here, not now. Sarah slips into the church just as Liam's voice begins to waver, her coat damp from the drizzle outside. She's late, her steps hesitant, and her face betrays the turmoil she's carrying. Moments earlier, she'd stood in the bathroom of her house, staring at the pregnancy test as two faint lines appeared. Positive. The word echoes in her head, loud and insistent, drowning out everything else. She'd shoved the test into her pocket and fled, knowing she couldn't miss the funeral but unable to sit with the truth alone. Now, standing at the back of the church, she watches Jacob's hunched form and feels a pang of guilt. Should she tell him? Can she when he's so broken? The service ends and the villagers spill out into the damp afternoon, making their way to the woolpack for the wake. It's a subdued affair at first, the clink of glasses and murmured condolences filling the air. Jacob is the center of attention, though he doesn't want to be. People hover, offering kind words and awkward hugs, and he nods mechanically, his eyes distant. Sarah lingers nearby, picking at a plate of food she doesn't intend to eat, her mind a jumble of fear and resolve. She needs to talk to him, needs to know where they stand, even if it terrifies her. Steeling herself, she approaches him as he leans against the bar, a half-empty pint in his hand. "Jacob," she says softly, her voice almost lost in the hum of the pub. "Can we talk? Just for a minute?" He looks at her, his eyes bleary and guarded. "I've done enough talking today, Sarah," he mutters, brushing past her. "Leave it, yeah?" She watches him go, her throat tight. The rejection stings, but it's the loneliness that cuts deeper. She's pregnant with his child, and he won't even look at her. The weight of it threatens to crush her, and she sinks into a chair, her hands twisting in her lap. Across the room, Charity Dingle watches her granddaughter with a frown. She's no stranger to Sarah's moods, having raised her through thick and thin, and something about the girl's hunched shoulders sets off alarm bells. Abandoning her conversation with Chas, Charity makes her way over, dropping into the seat beside Sarah with a casualness that belies her concern. "You all right, love?" Charity asks, her tone light but her eyes sharp. "You've barely said 2 words all day." Sarah forces a smile, but it wobbles. "I'm fine, Gran, just tired." Charity isn't buying it. She leans closer, lowering her voice. "Come on now, I know you better than that. What's going on?" The dam breaks. Sarah's eyes fill with tears and she digs into her pocket, pulling out the pregnancy test and pressing it into Charity's hand under the table. "I'm pregnant," she whispers, the words spilling out in a rush. "And Jacob, he won't even talk to me. I don't know what to do." Charity's face softens, though there's a flicker of shock in her eyes. She glances at the test, then back at Sarah, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmurs, pulling her close. "We'll figure this out, yeah.
About to
You're
receive
not
some
on
big
your own."
news.
Emmerdale spoilers follow. Emmerdale's Sarah Sugden feels lonely and isolated as she takes a pregnancy test next week. Sarah desperately tries to seek support from her on-off love interest, Jacob Gallagher, but is disappointed when he's too distracted by his grief. Viewers saw Sarah and Jacob's connection go beyond friendship last month as they spent the night together, but their relationship ran into trouble afterwards. Next week, Sarah feels powerless to help Jacob as he seems to be on a downward spiral following the death of his mom Layla Harding in the limo crash disaster. Jacob drinks heavily with his new friends. Sarah tries to talk him around, but he harshly dismisses her and warns her to stay away. Upset by Jacob's hostile reaction, Sarah secretly pulls an unopened pregnancy test from her bag and seems lost in thought. The next day, it's the morning of Layla's funeral and Sarah prepares to take the test. Meanwhile, many of the other villagers focus on the somber day ahead. Layla's friends and family are dressed to the nines, aware that she'd want a suitably glam send-off. At Jacob's request, Liam Kavanagh delivers a eulogy that Layla had written before her death. However, it quickly becomes clear that she wrote it for Jacob and he's left overwhelmed with emotion. Sarah arrives mid-speech, clearly preoccupied by the test that she's just done. Later, during the wake at the Woolpack, Sarah tries her best to grab Jacob for a chat as everyone fusses around him. Jacob insists that he's done enough talking for one day and walks off, leaving Sarah to struggle with the positive pregnancy test alone. It's Sarah's grandmother, Charity Dingle, who ultimately notices her troubled mood, and she manages to coax a confession out of her. Will Sarah tell Charity everything? Is Jacob about to face a life-changing revelation? Emmerdale spoilers ahead. In the quiet, rolling hills of the Yorkshire Dales, the village of Emmerdale is no stranger to drama, heartbreak, and secrets that bubble just beneath the surface of everyday life. Next week, the spotlight falls on Sarah Sugden, a young woman grappling with a whirlwind of emotions as she faces a potentially life-altering moment. Feeling lonely and isolated, Sarah takes a pregnancy test, an act that could shift the course of her future, while desperately seeking support from Jacob Gallagher, her on-again, off-again love interest. But Jacob, consumed by his own grief, seems unreachable, leaving Sarah to navigate her fears alone. Their connection, which blossomed beyond friendship just a month ago, has hit rocky terrain, and the timing couldn't be worse. The events of the past few weeks have set the stage for this emotional crossroads. Viewers will recall the tender yet fleeting moment when Sarah and Jacob crossed the line from friends to something more, sharing a night together that hinted at deeper feelings. It was a rare instance of vulnerability for both Sarah, often guarded after years of upheaval, and Jacob, a young man still finding his footing in a world that's dealt him more than his share of blows. But what seemed like a new beginning quickly unraveled. Jacob's life was upended by the tragic death of his mother, Layla Harding, in a catastrophic limo crash that shocked the village. Since then, he's been spiraling, lost in a fog of sorrow that Sarah feels powerless to pierce. Next week, that powerlessness takes center stage as Sarah watches Jacob slip further away. The once bright spark between them dims as he drowns his pain in alcohol, surrounded by a new crowd of friends who seem to egg him on rather than pull him back. It's a stark contrast to the Jacob Sarah thought she knew, the kind, thoughtful boy who'd been her rock through tough times. Now, as she reaches out, hoping to anchor him the way he once did for her, she's met with cold resistance. "Just leave me alone, Sarah," he snaps during one fraught encounter, his voice sharp with a hostility she doesn't recognize. His words cut deep and she retreats, clutching a secret that's too big to carry alone. An unopened pregnancy test hidden in her bag. The moment Sarah pulls that test from her belongings is a quiet one, but it's heavy with unspoken questions. She stares at it, her mind racing. Could she be pregnant? What would that mean for her, for them? The thought of bringing a child into the chaos of her life, and Jacob's, is overwhelming. She's barely out of her teens, still figuring out who she is, and now she's teetering on the edge of a decision that could define her. Alone in her room, she turns the test over in her hands, the weight of it sinking in. She wants to tell Jacob to share the burden, but his rejection stings too much. Instead, she resolves to face it herself, at least for now. The next day dawns gray and somber, mirroring the mood in the village. It's the morning of Layla Harding's funeral, A day that promises tears, reflection, and farewells.